let's do it. Let's do it.
Exciting.
Yay, me too. I'm excited. I'm excited to talk about vegan cuisine because you are the first vegan chef that I've spoken to on Retreat Builder. Yeah.
Nice.
And well, maybe we can start with you were telling me about, and I even told my husband how lucky to have grown up in a home where your mom practiced yoga and she was studying Ayurveda. And so can we start by, what was that like?
I mean, for me, that was very normal. I also went to a Steiner school, so I grew up around a lot of quite alternative people. So I didn't realize until when I left school quite how privileged that sort of way of being brought up was. I think in it, we just thought, that was the way you normally grow up, with quite a hippie mum. We spent like holidays in ashrams and things like that without realizing that that's not necessarily what you do. Mum was great because she became a yoga teacher, I think when she was pregnant with me or with my sister, my older sister. And so when we were little babies, she did all the like baby yoga, then toddler yoga, then kiddie yoga, then teenage yoga. So we just did it with her the whole time. And then I think when I left home and started finding like other yoga studios and realizing that mum's way of teaching was quite a specific way and it's not what you'll find in like your bog standard gym yoga style thing, that's when I realized, I think, how privileged it was to be brought up by someone who had such an authentic practice and such a traditional way of doing things. Like, she's really not about the showing off side of yoga that I can often find when I go to like a gym class yoga. It can be a bit like, oh yeah, we're all just showing off how bendy we are. Whereas mum's much more about the like mind and keeping it all for yourself and those things. So I feel very privileged now. But at the time, I think I just thought it was normal.
Yeah. I bet. I know. I mean, speaking for myself and a lot of other people, we wish we had that.
Yeah.
But we had to find our way to it on our own much later in life.
Well,
so that's amazing.
I do get that jealousy of people discovering it, because when people discover like yoga or Ayurveda, they're so infused and like, oh my God, I've found this thing that's like changed my life forever. And sometimes I get jealous of that. I'm like, oh, feels a bit disillusioned for me when I'm like, I've just like had it forever. And that's not the answer now. If I've got problems, it's not like, yoga will save it. It's like, that's just in the background of how we live.
That's so interesting. It's like I was talking to a friend of mine, Marissa. She has 2 kids, and we were just talking about how no matter how good you are, you're always going to mess it up. Because human beings, we need the struggle, because the story's in the struggle. And so if you don't have a struggle, you have no story. And basically, what are you doing with your life? You know? Yeah. So it's interesting that you like you said, growing up in an environment where a lot of the tools you grew up with are the answer for issues that people have. Yeah. Not growing up with those things. And so for you, it's like, yeah, that's normal. That's not gonna do it for me.
Right. Doesn't get rid of it in the long run. That's wild. Yeah. Maybe if I were as dedicated as my mum, I'd feel a little differently. But I think, I never got the like, oh my God, I found this thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what is the, oh my God, I found this thing for you?
I think it was Ayurveda, actually, when I got to about 22, because I feel before that I had been on a bit of a mission. I grew up in the 90s and the noughties where like diet culture and body shaming and all that stuff was like rife. And I'm a more curvy person. And I think I spent most of my teenage years like on crash diets and sort of trying to starve myself or like over-exercise and things like that. And I really damaged my guts. Like I really damaged what was already like a landscape of IBS and issues. I made it a lot worse through doing things like the Special K diet, where you just eat Special K every day. Just things like that. So when I got to...
That's crazy. I remember that. That's insane that we did that.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. It was awful. I know. I think for me, like I rebelled against when my mum started doing her Ayurveda masters. I was about 15, 16 when she started that. And I really rebelled against it. Obviously, I was a teenager and I was like, ugh, mum's just doing another yoga thing. Like, I'm not interested. And I went into like really extreme raw vegan kind of living at about 18. I got really hooked in that and spent about 4 years like extreme raw. And I do a lot of things in extreme. I think that was a big thing for me. It was like that was part of the damage I was doing to myself, and my guts were really taking a beating from being so extreme. And mum was continuously saying to me, like, you should really come and listen to one of the lectures that I'm listening to, or come and, you know, meet one of my teachers for Ayurveda. And I was just like, eh. And then at about 22, I think I hit crisis with my guts, and I had, you know, I kept going to hospital for like different things with my guts. And it was like, okay, obviously this like raw lifestyle in the UK where it's really not the environment to be raw. Like it's cold. It's too cold. Like you need, like your environment tells you what you should eat, and there's just not enough raw produce in the UK to eat. There's just potatoes, and you need to eat them cooked. So like, I think by the time I got to about 22, with all this crisis going on, I started to listen. I think I started to have that aha moment of like, what is Ayurveda? And it's like a much more tailored approach to the individual. It's not like a prescribed one thing fits all. It's like, okay, let's look at your constitution. Let's look at the damage you've done over the years. Let's look at your type of mindset. Like, how do you approach things? Are you going to go too hardcore with this? Are you going to be, you know, and it looked at all of that, and it just sort of, it hooked me. It was like, oh, I can be gentle with myself and still get at that point results, which was like a weight loss result based thing. And then when I moved past that, I was like, oh, I can get results in terms of I feel better. I think differently about myself. My body, for the first time in my whole life, has started to like do stuff for me rather than me having to like hammer it into submission, which is what it kind of was doing before. So that maybe was the aha moment for me, was like, yeah, around 22 with Ayurveda.
Wow. Sounds like a pretty intense period, at least for your stomach.
Yeah. I pulled
going through all that stuff.
Yeah.
I started diving into Ayurveda like around 2016. My husband introduced me to it, even though I was teaching yoga before that.
Yeah.
So kind of like very similar to your mom, you know, yoga teacher, even though I wasn't pregnant. I have no kids. And I really enjoy or appreciated that everybody's different, because like you tried so many diets, and raw might work for somebody for a particular type of body, like you said, in a particular environment, like maybe, you know, down in the tropics where it's super hot and everything's tropical.
Yeah.
But yeah, I really, what I like about Ayurveda, because I don't really follow it to a T, is that it caters to the differences. Yeah. And it's not just the differences in our own bodies, it's the difference in the seasons, and the difference in the location, and the difference in the food. And it's like, the mix of all of it.
Exactly. And the different times of your life, and all of that stuff. I think it's so good.
Yeah, because your dosha changes.
It totally does. And also I feel like for someone like me, and for a lot of people who got brought up on diet culture, like we want to have like strict rules, like you can do this, you can't do that, you have to restrict this, you have to restrict that. And that's kind of part of the problem. And that's what I like about Ayurveda. It doesn't tell you not to do something. It's just like, what about trying this? You know, it's like a more kind of comes around the back and like gets your brain interested in trying and being curious, rather than like a prescriptive, like you have to eat at this time of day, you have to do this, you have to do that, you know. And it just worked. It made it more, it had like a lot more longevity in it for me, because I can be continuously curious, because I'm not working on a goal-based thing, not like when I get here I'll be better. It's like just trying to add layers of like, oh, now I'm going to try and work with the idea of work, you know, the circadian rhythm. That's going to be a focus this year. Or I'm going to really focus on what's the difference between winter and summer eating. Or like, you can always add a layer, and it keeps it quite interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember that being a complete universe. There are some people who are very like all about the rules. And I think that's kind of what I was like, nah, because I was like, that's too, and I'm already like, I'm very pita and bata, or have been. So like too much of the is like, no. I need more flexibility.
Yeah.
I need so tell me, how does that work with the vegan cuisine that you're focused on now?
Yeah. So obviously, Ayurveda is not vegan, as you know. It's not a specifically vegan diet, but it's very plant-based, I would say. So it wasn't difficult to be vegan in the Ayurvedic space. Obviously, I don't use ghee when I cook, which is obviously quite a big part of Ayurvedic cooking. I was lucky because the teacher that I was working with my mum when she was first learning about the nutrition side of things, that teacher had a background in plant-based cooking. So she was really good at helping me understand like where to get good coconut oil from and what to look out for to look for the quality that you get from ghee. So I use things like coconut oil, and obviously I'm not using meat as the protein. But if I work with a one-on-one client, if I'm working as like a private chef or something like that and someone wants it, I'll include aspects of it. I'm not a very good cook of meat, but I can do how they would do it in Ayurveda, which is like a medicinal portion rather than like a whole meal built around meat. And that kind of works for me because it also works with my philosophy about how we should be consuming animal products if we were to consume them anyway, which is kind of more mindfully and more for the medicinal elements of them and not the gluttonous elements of them, which is what a lot of people, I think, find with animal products. We just kind of consume because it tastes good. So with my retreat catering and my other catering business, I do obviously fully vegan, and that's kind of my MO. That's how I market myself. And the Ayurvedic influence, I guess it comes in with the fact that I'm very seasonally based. I'm very whole foods based. I work with the different herbs and spices from kind of how the seasons are working and how to incorporate those herbs and spices as blends to kind of, combat whatever the season's accentuating. And what else do? I do a lot of different like layering of the Ayurvedic wisdom, whole food, seasonal, spice mixes. On retreat, depending on the retreat that I work with the kind of mental capacity of what you do when you do Ayurvedic nutrition, if you were to do it on yourself. So like the mindfulness around why you're eating rather than what you're eating and how you're eating, those kind of things. So I'll pose those questions into the group or work on them at the meal times. I also follow the circadian rhythm of the biggest meal of the day would be the middle meal. So when the sun's at the highest, that's when I'll do my main cook up if I'm doing breakfast, lunch and dinner. And then teach them about like, lighter dinners, different style breakfast for the different doshas. But obviously if you've got a group of multiple doshas, I follow the dosha of the season then and try and understand like how the season's dosha is impacting everyone in that group, even if they've got individualized doshas or constitutions. For anyone who doesn't know what a dosha is, your constitution.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
I need to grab a tissue really quick.
Do it.
Yes, and I'm dripping. So I just need to. Oh, thank you. That's really so you make like tree doshik, right? Because like tree doshik is good for all the doshas. And do you like put out like, let's say, okay, you need a little more fire, maybe you can add some spice, you need a little less, maybe you can add some milk and things like that?
I kind of work like that. I would say what I try and...
Or maybe not milk, coconut milk.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of retreats obviously bring their own milk along and I just say include it. But I'd say more what I kind of try and empower people with is the idea of, Mum's school of Ayurveda was very much trying not to get people hooked on the idea of like, what's your dosha and live by that. Because I think for her, the way that her teacher was working is that's quite unhelpful for a lot of people because it can get too complicated then. It's better to like give people the empowerment of understanding how to start listening to themselves. So when we're in a group scenario and people don't know much about Ayurveda, I won't focus on dosha, but I'll focus on like, how do you feel today? Like, are you feeling like you're getting really hot, or you're feeling really cold? Are you feeling really heavy? Are you feeling quite light? Is that something that you feel all the time? Is that time of your life? Is that because of summer or winter? And I get people to start kind of trying to place themselves within that. And often, for instance, I work with a group of menopausal women who come to a retreat every year with my mum. And those women have different symptoms that they're all kind of unanimously sharing, where it's like, oh, hot flushes, that's a real common thing of the menopause. So we'll talk about that in the context of like, maybe you're not a pitta person, but you are suddenly getting this heat, over excessive heat. And if you are a pitta person, that's going to be a really bigger, exaggerated version of that. So like, how do we cool down? And so I try and keep it like very simple. And so if I'm making a meal for someone or a group, I'll talk to them in that way. I'll say like, if you're feeling really hot, if you're feeling like you're getting really hot at night, like, don't add the chili just before bed. Maybe don't have a very intensive ginger meal. Maybe let's keep it a little bit more neutral. I don't cook with like excessive spices anyway, because obviously people can add their own. And so from a retreat point of view, I keep it quite like sattvic, like in the middle, which would be like Digestion, you said, but I kind of try and keep it more intuitive with the season. So if it's like very hot summer, I'll bring in like the very cooling stuff and talk about why that's happening. And if I'm doing an autumn retreat, I'll be like, oh, it's really cooling down now, guys. So we need to start heating up inside. Like, how can we do that? And then people are like, oh, chili does that. Oh, ginger does that. And then they start realizing, oh, so does pepper. So does cumin. And then they kind of build it, all that understanding of what hot means, like how you heat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that way of doing it, just focusing more on the seasons, because if your dosha is also changing, then that means, like you said, if you just focus on, I am this, that's very restricting. And sometimes I've been in a place where, it's like, oh, you're pitta, so you shouldn't this, that, and the other.
Yeah.
But
that's
maybe in a moment, but then my body is craving that thing that apparently I shouldn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
so I like this idea of.
Say that again. I think there's a slight delay on my side.
Yeah, I think so. I like the idea of just following the seasons, because we are nature, we are part of that, and then listening of like, what do I need as far as what elements are calling me?
Yeah. And that's where I like, because I didn't study Ayurveda from like a practitioner point of view. So I'm not prescribing herbs or diagnosing anyone or anything like that. I really just went into the nutrition side of things and studied it from that. And when you do it from that angle, you don't learn about the individualized dosha. You learn about how the food affects our body based on what's happening in the seasons outside. And so naturally, my approach became much more like holistic in the sense of what's happening. And then as I started working with different groups, like the menopause ladies, or I work with a whole bunch of like really like into surfing style people, like on surfing retreats, where it's like they're at that pitta point in their life. They're like, go get, that's like kind of, but in the group, there might be like a cover person or this person or that person, but like the energy is more pitta because they're like, they're on a surf retreat wanting to get up at 5 a.m. It's kind of that like, so that food then I'll bring down as like, right, we're going to do really kapha food so that you're grounded after all these like aggy surfs in the weather with the wind and all that stuff, and try and get people to think about food in that way. Like, how can it combat what's happening in the day or where I'm at?
And I love that you mentioned food. Well, you didn't say the words food as medicine, but you said something as medicinal.
Yeah.
Which is basically food as medicine. Yeah. And what an interesting, or what a different way, because food is delicious. I love eating. I'm not going to lie that I have gluttonous moments, especially with chocolate.
Yeah.
But on a daily basis, or more frequently, being able to look at food as medicine, as something that is going to nourish and heal your body.
Yeah. Yeah. And it can be powerful when you start to work like that. But also it has to be delicious so that you can, like, the satiation of food is also so important, because like even for preparing it, you need to like salivate over it, and you need to be like, ooh, like this is going to be, that's part of the experience, is that we kind of like get gluttonous. But I guess it's what you're putting in on those gluttonous moments, because I don't think like binging out on chocolate is like the worst thing we can do. especially if it's like not every day. But I've come from moments where like being in that kind of like culture of trying to starve yourself, then the binge culture also kicks off where like, I'll then binge for weeks. And that's when it's like, you can really feel it in your body. Whereas with Ayurveda, it's a lot more like, one of the great principles that I work with actually is the 6 tastes and having them all included in every single meal that you have so that you alleviate the need to have cravings afterwards. So sweet is a flavor that we crave the most. Like obviously mother's milk was sweet. We got hooked on sugar from like day one. It's our favorite thing. And so in a meal, when I'm preparing it for someone, I'll make sure that the sweet component is there so that we don't need afterwards to like go nuts on the ice cream or go nuts on the biscuits. Right. That's not to say I don't do that. That's just to say that trying to be more holistic and getting the meal balanced so that all of those tastes are hit means that the kind of like greediness then is just because the food's good. I want to eat more and more of it, but it's healthy. So what's the problem? Rather than like my old style of eating, which is like restrict, don't eat. And then, oh my God, I'm going to eat loads of that because I don't care anymore. I'm going to eat all the ice cream or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So is that kind of like umami?
Yeah. So umami doesn't exist in Ayurveda, but they have, of course the flavor does, but they break it down into sweet, salty, sour, pungent, astringent, and bitter. So that's really interesting. Like when you look into the science of why they've got those flavors, if you are incredibly clean and sensitive, and this is, I can't, my mum can, if she's been following one of her hardcore programs, you can taste those stages of digestion through. So the first one is, I think, bitter. And then as you move through it, you can start to taste, and you know when you've got to the end of your digestive pattern, when you get to, I think it's salty, I can't remember the order, but there's 6 tastes of digestion that you'll get on the back of your tongue as you go through the different, like stomach acid into your intestine, through. And so that's what, if you get all 6 of those in your plate when you're eating, you'll then hit all of them through your digestion and you won't have the craving. That's the idea behind having 6 flavors on a plate, because you have 6 taste receptors on your tongue. And I think umami... That's
really cool.
Yeah, it's so cool. I think umami makes up... Look at this the other day. I think umami makes up like sweet and bitter together or something like that. It's like 2 flavors combined is what we know as umami, from that kind of very savory flavor.
Yeah. Wow. I didn't think about that. Like the digestion also has taste.
Well, only if you're really clean. If you're not really clean, like I can't. I've never got to a point where I could taste my digestion, but I definitely recognize there's 6 stages of it now. Like I can feel that there are 6 stages, and then I know when it's finished. And so I can start eating again, because that was another problem with when I was on restrictive diets, is I didn't listen to what was actually happening in my body. I was just on, you need 500 calories and that's it. And I would like not think about when and how I was consuming them, which is actually the more important thing in terms of getting the nutrients or getting the energy from them so that you can then have a good day. That's all about finding how your digestive system does its job. I think it's 4 hours, they say, 4 hours until you're ready to go again. Which is why snacking is such a hard...
I love learning about how much we don't know about our own bodies. And if like, even just through meditation doesn't have to be just sitting down and with your eyes closed and thinking of nothing, but you could meditate on your digestion. And maybe, like if you were to go through at each 30-minute interval or 45-minute and like, where do I feel it in my body? Where is it now? What stage do I think it's in?
Yeah.
And you might be able to intuitively get better at, like you said, just knowing where it's at, because you're putting attention on it.
Yeah, exactly. And it really helps to do that practice with whole foods rather than processed foods, because whole foods register at the right point, whereas processed foods send signals into the wrong receptors, basically, because your body's going, oh, what's that? Rather than, oh, I know what that is. So it can confuse those things. But also,
and you talked about the saliva.
Yeah.
Sorry, there's a delay.
It's okay. The saliva?
Yeah, the saliva, what I learned from Ayurveda is that the saliva is really important, even like to chew your food for a little bit longer, a little bit slower, so that you get the saliva breaking it down in your mouth before it even gets to your stomach.
Yeah. Because the concept is, which I think was the game changer for my guts, like at least for me, do the work for your body so your body can do the work it needs to do, which is the absorption. And so one of those tricks to do that is to chew. That's doing the work. That's making sure that you've done the majority of the breaking down before it hits your stomach. Otherwise, your stomach has to work really hard. And what Ayurveda talks about all the time is that, you've got this Agni, this fire that's keeping everything going. And we do a lot in our sort of Western culture to destroy that. We drink a lot of cold drinks. We drink while we eat. We're constantly diluting and putting out that fire, which means our body is constantly having to reignite, which essentially, when talking about stomach acid, the heat of your stomach acid, the intensity of it, we're constantly having to like rebalance that, which is why all of us have all these like indigestion issues, because we've put too much cooling effect on that liquid, or diluting effect by drinking pints of water or liquid while we're eating. Whereas in Ayurveda, they're like quite strict about that. They're like, no, don't add liquid to your meal, because you're going to then have to work twice as hard to get the stomach acid back to the level it needs to be to digest the thing, to then pass it to the next thing, because you've diluted it.
Yeah.
And actually, it's really intuitive. That's what I liked about Ayurveda. It wasn't like, I didn't have to be a scientist. I don't have a scientific brain. I've got quite a logical, practical, image-based brain. And when I got told these stories in image form, like, of course, if you add loads of liquid to that stomach, it's going to dilute that thing, and then that's going to have to, you're not going to have the right balance. And it's like, that makes so much sense as to why I wasn't digesting properly, because I wasn't chewing. I was downing cold water glasses, like as I was eating, to try and help my food go down, because I wasn't chewing it. And then I was like, no wonder it's all coming out like a nightmare at the other end. So yeah, that's what I like about it. It's intuitive. As soon as you sort of tap into Ayurveda from like a very logical, how we've been doing it for millennia, it makes perfect sense. It's like, of course, we've got teeth for chewing, obviously use them. Because I was famous for like talking and eating and being all like, "Rah!" when I was doing my food, and just like literally swallowing things whole and being like, and then carrying on, and then being like, God, I've got such a bad tummy ache, I've got such bad IBS, why is this happening? Like, well, obviously not chewing anything, not having any mindfulness around eating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what, so I've stopped drinking during my meals, because I also notice that my stomach feels really full for a long time, because it's, it's like when you're cooking, if you have a pan of food and then you add water into that pan, all of a sudden everything that was cooking just goes down. And but I always wondered about soup. How does it work with soup?
Well, I mean, I eat soup in the season when they tell you to eat soup, which is in the wintry, drier seasons, when we have a natural drying out of the insides. And I satiate myself with soups then. And then in the spring, it's about broth. So it's the lighter side of soup, because it's a lot like spring is much more about like heaviness and dampness. And they want you to kind of cut through that with thinner broths. So I use soup in that way, but I don't combine it with another meal. So I'm not having soup and a whole bunch of other stuff. It's just like, that's all I'm eating. And it's normally my evening meal. Like, in the ashram, when I go and cater, I go to, there's an ashram in Wales near where I live. And I go and cater for them. And their kind of whole idea is that the last meal of the day is just a soup, like very light, because they're doing like quite intensive meditation practices. And they don't want to disrupt that process in the evening. So they really just take all the difficulty out of digestion and do soup. So from an Ayurvedic point of view, that kind of makes sense, in the sense of soup is great. It's like a liquid diet. You couldn't eat it for every meal, because you need to chew, because the chewing is really important. But if you're just doing it at the end of the day to kind of send you off into a very easy digestible meal, so that you can get it done really quickly and go to sleep and not have to do any of it, it makes sense. But it's not about combining it, I think, with, because obviously I love eating soup with like massive loaves of bread. Like, that's the best way. It's the best way of eating soup. But I think that combination is when it starts to become a little bit troublesome, because it's like you're filling up on liquid and then you're adding loads of bread to it, which is swelling. So then it can feel a bit like difficult. But the thing is that I wouldn't say don't do that. I would say feel it, like feel the difference. Like, does that feel okay for you? Do you have the sort of digestive system that can manage that? Like I noticed quite quickly when I really started listening, I was like, I can't. Like if I do that, I don't feel good 4 hours later. I feel like somewhere between the two. I feel like I've had too much and too little. So it's like it doesn't work for me, but I had to like feel that out. I couldn't be told that. And I think Ayurveda is about that. Like work it out for yourself. Like what sits right in your gut. Because if you said you're quite a pitta person, pitta people can tend to be able to digest pretty much like anything. They're like, we can get through those things. But then if you're also vata, you're probably sort of and like snacks a lot and like maybe damages yourself through picking like a bird.
Yes, that's me. You described me.
Yeah.
All of those things. Yeah. Definitely not kappa or kapha, however you pronounce it. Yeah, definitely not. But so you mentioned soup with meditation, or to not distract from the meditation practice. How do you also create your menus for retreats, not just for the season, but for the types of activities? Do you take that into account?
Yeah, I do. I mean, a lot, because I work a lot in yoga space. A lot of facilitators for yoga retreats have very specific ideas of how they want that food to be. So it's often told to me, like, we need it to be, the sattvic one is quite a common one. So like no onions, no garlic, nothing to stimulate the, I mean, they say, I don't know if I believe this, but they say it like stimulates your like destructive kind of energies, like your sexual energy or your angers or things like that. So I guess your pitta energy can be stimulated too much by certain ingredients. And I think when you're doing heavy meditation or like very intensive meditation, they prefer not to have that. I've never gone that far into yoga to kind of feel that out for myself, but my mum did a Kriya yoga course about 3 years ago. And it was a course that lasted for 2 years. And, you know, the practice itself got super heavy. And I think in the end, she was having to do like a 2.5 hour practice in the mornings. And she was really interesting to talk to while she was going through that process, because what she kept reflecting back at me is like, oh my God, my senses are getting so much more crisp. So like her sense of smell and taste and hearing and sight, like over those 2 years, like highly tuned up. And in that, when we'd go back to the ashram and she'd be on that course and I'd be catering it, that was a really strict diet then, because everyone was at that really heightened sensitivity point because of the meditation they were doing. So I was having to do incredibly, like how I would say from a catering point of view, bland, like minimalistic, simplistic, everything cooked, almost like baby food. So like no digestion was ever going to be interrupted, you know, like super. And so, yeah, for a course like that, they'll be very clear. And then for most retreats, most courses, I do a lot of like surf and yoga where it's not really like anything spiritual going on, really. It's just like, please feed them, they'll be hungry. And I know those groups now. So I know it's like, give them big portions, rich food, really make sure that a lot of these people aren't vegan on the retreat. They panic when they hear it's going to be vegan. So really make sure that no one's leaving that table hungry, because that's the main thing that non-vegans feel like is going to happen on a vegan retreat. They're like, I'm going to be so hungry, I'm never going to survive. So I'm like, no, I will show you you'll never be hungry. So then it's a completely different shift into like satiate them. Yeah.
Every time you say satiate, my salivatory glands are like,
here it is.
I'm like, what are we satiating? What's coming up? Okay. So one of the things that we talked about was how a lot of vegan cuisine is processed. And in the beginning, when you were telling me about all the diets that you were going through, and you mentioned Special K, which is very interesting. I'm glad that you mentioned that. I really had erased that from my memory. And that's such a, now looking back as an adult and someone who has been in marketing for a while, that is such a marketing, like that was pure marketing. just to sell special case cereal.
Yeah. Horrible. I think like that whole
That's insane.
Yeah, it's horrible. I mean, but it still happens now. Like I look around me, and again, I work with people one-on-one, and so I hear people's horror stories of what they're doing, like currently, what they're being told currently by GPs in the UK. And I'm just like, what the hell is going on? Like, how is that nutrition? And it's just like, I think the education behind nutrition is so warped because it's just owned by big business. It's not owned by people who actually have an invested interest in people feeling good, like at all. And that's quite, that's quite shocking. I mean, I think I had a real eye opener to that when I was at the beginning of my sort of like Ayurvedic journey. My brother was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma cancer. So he had a big tumor growing in his throat. And he is incredibly like healthy, fit, young. He was 19 when he was diagnosed. It was like quite a shock and like quite shocking for the sense of like, we came from this like really healthy background. Like, how could this happen? All these things. And what was the most alarming was he would go in for his chemo appointments, which, either you believe in it or you don't. It's like, that's what they're giving everyone, right? That's the main medicine that they do for cancer. So Mikhail was going in for his cancer treatments, and then we'd go and sit with him in the canteen at the hospital, at the main hospital in the UK for cancer treatment, like the big popular hospital that is, changing everyone's life. And then literally feeding them like bacon on white bread with ketchup and like the food coming out of that canteen. I was just like, how is this legal? Like, how is that allowed? How are we feeding the people who are the illest? They're at the most vulnerable. Mikhail's getting whacked with the worst chemicals. He's dying from the chemo, essentially. Here's your lunch. It's a bacon and egg fried combination. And I just found that so bonkers. Like, that's our health institute. And they think that that's good. And like the actual people at the hospital were like, no, but it's healthy. It's protein. I'm like, what? Like, do we know what healthy protein is, people? Like, no, because the education of it's just not there. It's like, it's owned by big business. So it's not gonna trickle down into like the hospitals or the GP's office or whatever. I think that's scary because then, when the vegan food trend happened in the UK, it was all like, let's replicate what meat's out there. That's healthier, right? To have a vegan sausage, to have a vegan bacon, to have a vegan this. It's like, well, what are we thinking is healthy here? Just because it's not animal-based anymore. Like, I would say the animal-based one's probably healthier than the thing that you've just made. Like, at least it's a whole food. At least it's like an actual recognizable piece of food. Yeah. So it's a very warped industry, the food industry.
That's a whole other topic. My mom also had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and she went through chemo treatments, and it was really rough. Wow. So I resonate. And back then I was not as conscious to think about what they were feeding her. So I wasn't even aware, but I'm pretty sure there was not a vegetable or a green anything on that tray.
No. I genuinely believe that the reason my brother did so well in that treatment is that because I've got this quite polarizing parental thing where my dad's very, I don't know what we want to call it, like standard, like pro medication and all that stuff. My mum's obviously like the Ayurveda, yoga, like, let's meditate to make ourselves better kind of thing. And so my brother was in the middle of that kind of, I guess, wanting to please both parents or wanting to experience what both of them were saying was going to save him. And every kid on his ward, kept getting sick on their chemo treatment. They kept having infections, and this one got, pneumonia, and then this one got this, because that's quite common when you're going through hardcore chemo, is that you get a lot of side illnesses going on because you're so suppressed. And Mikhail, and I think it's because my mum was so adamant that he was going to be on this like hardcore Ayurvedic herbal concoction where she was just like giving him like nuts amounts of herbs and stuff. And his main thing was these big vials of spirulina, like high grade spirulina, that mum's Ayurvedic doctor that she did her master's with was like, he needs this. And he was taking like, they're huge, these vials of spirulina. And he was like soared through. He like went into remission super quickly, cycled to London to Brighton thing, like competed in tennis tournaments. Like he looked like hell because he was still going through chemo and everything, fell out and all that.
Wow.
But he never got one illness. And like, I just think, if they did that in hospitals, like in combination with chemo and whatever, like just give people like immune building things like good food and herbs that are going to support your immune system. And like Mikhail was doing like Ayurvedic therapy style, like on his mind, because obviously it's mind, body and spirit that they work with. So you have to kind of look at all three to kind of fix someone. And I just think, the medical system just doesn't do that. It doesn't look at things like that. It's just like, let's kill the cancer with this thing and maybe kill everything else at the same time and hope for the best.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's it, my friend.
Wow. Yeah, that's a whole, I mean, I'm very passionate about that topic, but that would
a whole nother thing.
Maybe we can have another chat. Yeah, it's a whole nother thing. I mean, okay, so back to, because there's a common misconception that I wanted to touch on with you, which is what we talked about before, how a lot of vegan diets are very processed, because sometimes, most of the time, people go vegan because of their love for animals. You know, they want to be more compassionate to animals, but then, like you said, they start going toward these fake bacon, fake hamburger, and it's full of junk. It's full of preservatives, full of chemicals, instead of learning how to incorporate more whole, real foods from the earth. Like, so what's the difference between vegan that's processed and vegan that's plant-based?
From how I do it, I really promote whole foods. So however that looks, you know, I just, even if it's not vegan, if I'm working with someone who's not a vegan person, they're just wanting to get healthier, wanting to feel better, I just really start with the whole foods understanding of like, what is an actual ingredient and what's something that's been like highly manipulated to be something that you add into something or make with something. And so get people to kind of understand like what grains are, what pulses are, what vegetables actually are, because actually, you know, I'm blessed with having a background of always having whole foods. So I understand it, just like intuitively, I understand what whole foods are. But a lot of people that I've worked with over the years don't actually know. They don't know what like pulses are. They're like, what do you mean pulse? I'm like, you know, like beans. And they're like baked beans. And I'm like, no, like the thing that made the baked bean, like the bean that's in there, that's an ingredient. Like, let's look at the ingredient, you know? And so stripping people back to understanding what makes up the dishes that they understand on their plate. So, you know, baked beans on toast is like an English classic. How do we make that whole foods? Like teach people like make a nice tomato sauce yourself, make that from scratch. Let's learn how to make something like that. Let's learn how to soak our beans and wash our beans and sauce our beans correctly and all those things, and get people to kind of tap back into what food actually is and what it has the power to do in your body based on the ingredient, the basic ingredient. And I'm not opposed to like using interesting condiments. I like to make my own. I like to do a lot of fermenting and stuff like that. But I'll also, you know, I'll use like tamari, which is a highly processed soya product essentially. But it's like, how am I using that? Am I using that in a highly processed meal, or am I using that as like a tiny bit to add a flavor? And so it's like teaching people about the balance of how do we bring in processed food, because we live in a processed world. Every oil that we use is a processed oil. You know, sugar is processed, honey is processed, all these things, you know, you can't get the raw form of them very easily. But then how do we use them in moderation against a basic ingredient diet? So it's like the grain, the vegetable, the pulse. And that's where Ayurveda is so great, because if you go into traditional recipes, it's never asking for anything processed. It's just like telling you the exact basic ingredient and work from there.
I love what you said about the balance, because you're absolutely right. I mean, we're not magicians, you know, we can't just like bring ourselves back to a time where we have a full garden at our disposal of organic, wonderful things. Some people do. Yeah. But especially, you know, people who they're not chefs, they're not cooks, they're just trying to make a meal so that they can eat and move on. They go to the store and they have what is available in the store. So just learning how to use what you have, but use it to your advantage. I like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And also I feel like empowering people to know how to cook from scratch, you know, without having to necessarily be completely whole foods based, but how to just cook from scratch. So if they're used to buying a pasta sauce in a jar, like I teach someone, well, like, let's make a pasta sauce from scratch. Let's just learn about, even if it's tinned tomatoes that we're using, let's still make it from scratch so that you're controlling the ingredients that are in that sauce, not you're just accepting whatever's been put in there to stabilize it to be on the shelf or whatever. you're making something that you're in control of. And it's just like helping people to really recognize what power they do have. And obviously then there's a convenience thing because we all live in a very fast paced lifestyle and don't have hours to do things, but you can still eat whole foods. You can still eat majority of your diet whole foods. You just need to be confident enough to know what to do. I always tell my clients actually to get onto a veg box scheme so that they're forced into eating seasonal local food. So find their local veg box scheme. It's going to be dropped off once a week. They don't get to choose what arrives. And then I teach them how to feel confident in no matter what arrives on the doorstep. There's loads of ways to prepare vegetables. How can you do it? Like, let's just play with the different shapes that you can cut up or textures that you can make or ways of cooking them. You want to steam them, you want to boil them, you want to bake them, you want to roast them, get people excited about what comes in their veg box. And then instantly people's mindset switches and they're like, oh, I can actually make my own flavor. And then it's easy.
Wow. That sounds like a lot of fun. How do you, when you say clients, are you working with people locally or do you also work online or is it like a group thing or how do you?
Yeah, I do a lot online. A lot of my one-on-one clients are online actually, just because I teach like cooking classes online with groups. And then a lot of those people will then contact me and say, can you work with me one-on-one? And then they have their camera set up in their kitchen and then they're cooking within their own kitchen, which is also helpful for them to feel empowered by their own equipment and space and style of cooking. And then I'm just sort of guiding them through. So yeah, it's mostly online. I have gone to a few people's houses, but then it always ends up being more like a private chefing thing with me telling them what I'm doing. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, because you're there. It's like, just why don't you do it?
People are weird when you're like watching them as well. When you're in their space, they feel a bit more self-conscious. Whereas if the camera is just there and they're kind of just chopping and making their own mess and I'm not there like breathing down their necks, they feel like they can repeat it without me being there. Rather than when I leave, often people are like, oh, I forgot everything that you said. It's like, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, you're inspiring me to make the box thing happen. I recently saw an ad because I kind of live in a very remote area, but I recently saw an Instagram ad, I think, for a box. And I was like, ooh, I think I want a box. But then it's scary when you think, what if what's in the box is not something I know how to cook with? Or what if I don't like it? Or... like because you don't want the food to go to waste if you've never made it and you don't know what to do with it.
You're not allowed. Well, that's my challenge I always set with my clients. It's like, you have to use everything that's come. Even if that means we're going to make a condiment that we're going to make a sauce out of that then lasts for 6 months because you can't eat all of that this week. Teaching people how to kind of use ingredients as they come through the door. Like, that's another thing that I'm really passionate about is getting people back in touch with the old ways of preserving food. Because we would have had like an abundance in summer of herbs and spices, like all of your coriander and all of your mint and all that stuff. It grows in abundance in the summer, but you might want to have it like in the wintertime in some way. How do we prolong the life of something? How did we do that? And I think that's where like those veg box things are really great because they always send you like really random things, like loads of this something. And you're like, what am I going to do with like 25 turnips? Like, I don't know what to do with turnips. I don't know how to do this. And so then I would like challenge my client, like, how can we turn this into something preserved? How can we turn this into something pickled? How can we make a sauce that we can then store in our larder for months without having to use a fridge? And get people to start thinking about food in that because maybe you don't want the ingredient like turnip as a turnip, but you could make a really cool dehydrated powder that then is an amazing stock for a soup.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah, because like turnip's really great if you grate it down, bake the pieces, blend the pieces, and you've got little tiny dusty bits. And then that's like an amazing stock because it's such that's a bit of an umami flavor. It's such a savory thing. And you add it to any mashed potato thing or any soup or any curry. You've just got like a condiment that you can use.
What about so you mentioned pickled and I think you said something about fermentation. Have you ever done a fermentation workshop?
Yeah, online.
Or at a retreat? Yeah.
Yeah. And retreat actually.
That would be cool at a retreat.
Yeah. It's always popular because it's like a fun 2-hour activity in the afternoon where everyone wants to kind of get involved. And fermentation is cool because it's very physical. Like, you're going to get your hands involved. It's messy. You start to kind of break down people's barriers about what they can and can't do with ingredients. It sounds really complicated, but as soon as you've done 2 hours, it's like, oh my God, that was so easy. I could do that at home. But then they feel like they've learned something really cool because it's like, I learned how to make kimchi, or I learned how to make a sauerkraut. That's so crazy. But it's actually like, no, it's just like 2 ingredients. You just have to massage them for a bit.
Yeah. And it's really good for your gut too. It's full of probiotics.
Especially if you make it yourself in your own home, because then you're using your own environment and your own like enzymes on your hands to match what's going on inside. It's just like instantly better match.
Tell me about enzymes on the hands.
Well, just like I'm anti-over sterilizing. So like COVID was the worst for that. We just like got obsessed by antibacterial stuff, and it's just like, don't do that. Damages your gut so badly. Your skin is obviously your biggest, organ. It's the biggest version of your microbiome. That's your skin. And so what we touch all day long and how we consume the world is through our skin. And it's what makes up our biome inside, our microbiome. It's what helps it stay diverse. If you're continuously anti-backing or washing your hands, you're basically stripping your ability to get it into you, to consume it. So when you touch your food, you kind of need that bacteria. Like my gut health guru, who I work with, she's amazing. She said the best thing that someone can do for their health if they're really struggling is get a dog, because that dog's going to continuously bring in bacteria that you're going to touch, and it's going to get into you. And you need that continuous exposure of what we see as like germs and horrible stuff. It's like, it's not, it's how we keep ourselves diverse. And so when you like massage your sauerkraut, and you have to do it for ages, you're transferring all of that into there. And also you have to do it with love and kindness and like mentality of like, you're going to heal me. And it just amplifies in the ingredient. Your ingredient just takes it on and like really has a big effect on how your gut then works.
Wow. I had a friend that told me that we have chakras in our fingertips too.
Ah, wow. That's cool.
Yeah. I think her mother, her stepmother, or her mother, someone in her family is from India and was really into, I don't know if it was Ayurveda, but she mentioned that we have chakras in our, and that's why when you touch the food, it's also sending signals to the brain of like what you're about to put in your mouth.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's what's so that's what I'm so passionate about in terms of like, we're such an amazing organism, and like the sight of food, the smell of food, the touch of food, the sound of it, it all prepares your digestion. It always starts to send the signals of like, get ready for this. I can smell that. And it's like, that.
Yeah.
I learned this crazy thing the other day, which just blew my mind. I think this is exactly what we're talking about, but in a different way. When babies breastfeed, when they like suckle on the nipple, essentially, they have a spit back that goes back into the nipple, and the nipple then analyzes the spittle and goes, oh, it's deficient in calcium today. It needs a bit of this, it needs a bit of that. So then the next batch of milk, it's prepared all of that. Like, that is so bonkers. That is so bonkers. And I think that's what we're doing all day long.
That's crazy.
Yeah, with how we touch, smell, perceive. But that's why I feel like whole foods are so important, because our system is matched to that. It's not matched to the fake version of it. It doesn't know what the fake version is. So it can't prepare or like understand it or analyze it, because it's not part of that natural thing that we've done. That's why we've evolved where we have. That's why we're so intelligent, because our body's continuously been assessing food and being like, okay, we need a bit more of this, we need a bit more of that, we need to like, And so the fake food that we keep putting in there, it's like, no idea what that was.
Yeah. Speaking of fake food, I think it's so important to read the labels. There have been so many times where I will go to buy like peanut butter, for example. And then I look at the ingredients and it says 100% peanuts, but then it has like 50 something percent trans fat. Like, how is that possible? How does it have trans fat if it's 100% peanuts?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Am
I
I
what
just
you mean. Yeah, no. I'm
not getting it?
No, I would definitely have to think about it longer in terms of like, is the trans fat just in peanuts? Is it just got that much trans fat in it as an ingredient? I mean, I know that like, if they say it's 100%, then there has to be. But in the same way that when I read a label of like juice, like apple juice, and it's like 100% apple juice, and then you read like everything else that's in it in terms of like the nutrients and stuff like that, I'm like, well, those aren't all belonging to apples. So how did they get there?
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, it's all, I don't know. I find the food industry so corrupt. It's like, I don't know. I don't think you can believe any of it, really. So that's
So
why
I'm
I say go to
saying,
the farm
read the
shop.
labels.
Yeah, we'll just get
Yes.
get the ingredient and just make your own peanut butter. I mean, which I know is not, we can't all do that. But yeah, when it gets to that point, if you're like battling cancer or something like that, you need to be strict, like be strict, because the food industry is not giving you the full picture for sure. For sure it's not.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
luckily we have people like you who are cooking up amazing food for us to heal and thrive and feel good in our bodies.
Yeah.
So
Good.
is there any advice that, I mean, you have so much wisdom. You have so much wisdom. Thank you so much for sharing all of it. This conversation has been like, it's been so good. All the feels. Is there any advice that you would give to retreat leaders or retreat hosts that want to start incorporating more vegan food, but more vegan food that's whole, plant-based?
Yeah, I would just say, I mean, I'm lucky in the sense that for some reason, every retreat I've ever worked on or any retreat chef that I've ever worked with, they all have the same mindset as me. Like I've never come across a retreat chef who's like, I don't know, just putting together like burgers and fries or something like that. Like it's just, it just hasn't gone in the mix that I've worked in. And maybe there are people like that, but I feel like if you're interested in health and wellness, like the chefs that are interested in that space as well, just tend to have more interest in that. They might not be vegan, they might not be necessarily Ayurvedic based, but most of the people I've ever worked with are whole foods based, and at least based on budget as well, they'll work seasonally because most retreat chefs are buying the food themselves and having to work on their own budget. So they're going to be buying what's in season because it's the most affordable. So I think you're quite like in the realm of running a retreat, you're quite likely to come across someone who's passionate about whole foods naturally in that space. But I think it's also worth asking the questions like when I work with a new retreat, if I'm getting interviewed to kind of go on to a new retreat, I'm quite, at this point in my career, I'm quite selective to know that we're at least all on the same page. I don't want to be making this amazing food and then see it like break time that they're putting out all the trashy cookies and crisps and stuff like that. Like that would bum me out. So I'm quite careful as to who I work with as well in terms of that. Like I'm picky because I want to make sure that what I'm doing because I want to make sure that when people leave, a lot of people come on a retreat and they haven't actually done something for themselves like that before. And when they leave, one of my favorite parts of it is getting an email to be like, I haven't pooed this well in 10 years, or I haven't, been able to like actually think in the evenings, or I wake up every day with a headache and this was the first week I never had a headache, like those types of emails. And I can be like, yeah, this is why, this is how you can do it for yourself. So if I'm working with a retreat leader who's then like dishing out the chocolate, like bad chocolate, not the good one, because I like to do cacao ceremonies, I'm big into chocolate, but not then, Nesquik, for instance, wouldn't be doing that. I'd find that like difficult to.
Yes, I would too.
Yeah, I've definitely had it in my early part of my career. I worked on retreats where I was like, I probably wouldn't do this one again. Like this doesn't feel in line with what I'm doing. So I think it's both ways. I think facilitators and chefs should be asking similar questions just to find out if you're going to be on the same page.
Yeah. Intention and alignment.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, is there anything else that you would like to share, a message that you would like to leave to the community? Community?
I'm so excited that you're starting this community. As I said to you when we first met, I think this is so great. I think we need community, especially in this kind of space. There isn't something that links us all together, and this is what we need. I think it's great. I can't wait to see where it goes. I'm really excited. I want to come to Mexico and see you guys in person.
Yeah. Yes, please.
Yeah.
I'm like, I've got it in my mind that this is definitely a living organism that is evolving, and we are going to start, like creating puzzles, taking pieces and making little puzzles with all the pieces. So yes.
Yeah.
Retreat in Mexico. Exactly. I would love to have you as the chef.
I'm doing this series at the moment. I've done one in Germany. We're doing one in Devon where I live, and we're going to do another one in Germany. Could do one in Mexico. Me and my friend she's also a retreat chef. We are creating a cooking course that we run a few times now to teach people how to do this for themselves. If they want to become a chef in a retreat, they could take it for that. Or if they just want to be empowered to cook for themselves in the kitchen, we're doing these like in-person, because I've taught it online loads, but these are like in-person, so like you go on a retreat, but you're having cooking classes the whole way through that are about exactly what we've just spoken about, like how to actually heal yourself, heal the planet, work with your own gut, work with the seasons. So we should do that in Mexico because that would be amazing. The produce there is so good.
Yeah. There's so much. I've never seen coming from the US where everything is very expensive and limited, and then coming here where it's just like a circus of every fruit of every color, and yeah, it's amazing.
Great. It would be such a great place.
Okay, Nikita. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yes.
Yay.
It was a pleasure.